Welcome to MELfeed.video. We are commencing a live web stream service via youtube.com from Melbourne, Australia. We currently conduct these streams mainly on Wednesday evenings, with other times to be added as more opportunities arise. Please visit our website at MELfeed.video for further information. This web video project presents old and new community TV programs. Please enjoy your stay with MELfeed.video.
Welcome to NAT Chat, produced by Northern Access TV. Today's topic is about persecution, specifically persecution against Christians. It is a topic that is neglected, or people do not really think too much about it, but some figures are very staggering. 164,000 in 2002, and the projected figures for 2025 exceeds 200,000. With us, we have Kay Harrison today. She's an artist in her own right and a professional artist, but at the same time, she's got a passion about the persecuted church. And she leaves the subject. Also, Kay, you bring us a lot of experience in that matter. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Paul.
Just to start off with, can you talk to us about yourself?
Yes.
Where you coming from and grow up?
Well, I was born in Melbourne, Carlton to be more specific.
Okay.
At the Royal Women's Hospital, just in case there are any people out there that were born in that same hospital.
Very local.
Yes, absolutely. And I lived in the inner suburban sort of suburbs of Melbourne, the inner suburbs, places like Clifton Hill. I spent many years there, Fitzroy and Collingwood sort of areas. We moved further out into the western suburbs as I got older.
Okay. And how would you describe your upbringing as a young child?
Well, I'm the eldest of 5.
Okay.
And my father was my singing teacher from a very young age, so music's been a part of my life since I was born.
Okay.
He was learning at the time full-time. He was learning to be a tenor at the time by a maestro called William Boyce, who was from England, who'd come over to Australia in the 1960s and 70s.
Okay.
And he was teaching Dad, and according to my mum, I was singing La Donna Immobile at 18 months in the cot. So Dad undertook to begin training me before I had even reached school age. And so I did lots of classical scales, breathing exercises, with a view to being a soprano. But of course, I branched out as I got older.
That means music in your
Places like Clifton Hill, I spent many years there, Fitzroy and Collingwood sort of areas. We moved further out into the western suburbs as I got older.
Okay. And how would you describe your upbringing as a young child?
Well, I'm the eldest of 5.
Okay.
And my father was my singing teacher from a very young age, so music's been a part of my life since I was born.
Okay.
He was learning at the time full-time. He was learning to be a tenor at the time by a maestro called William Boyce, who was from England, who'd come over to Australia in the 1960s and 70s.
Okay.
And he was teaching Dad, and according to my mum, I was singing La Donne Mobile at 18 months in the cot. So Dad undertook to begin training me before I had even reached school age. And so I did lots of classical scales, breathing exercises, with a view to being a soprano. But of course, I branched out as I got older.
That means music in your life was something like organically within you.
I don't remember being in the house for one day, not even for an hour, without hearing my father sing or hearing some kind of music in the background. So music played a very, very big role in my life.
And then you got professionally into music later on, and
yes, as I got older, I did. But the thing is, I didn't stay with the classical. I did love classical music, but I found that I was able to do a lot of different styles. I was really blessed to have that versatility, and I was drawn to other styles of music, and so I branched out into things like pop music and jazz, gospel, reggae, funk, rock. So I've done quite a variety of styles of music over the years.
And you got involved in 2 different groups, music groups?
Yes, yes. Okay. I mean, over the years, I've been part of all kinds of things, bands, trios, duos, working in the private sector, as well as doing the pubs and the club scene of Melbourne. In fact, I was a full-time singer at the age of 18 at a nightclub in Exhibition Street in Melbourne called the Galaxy Nightclub.
Okay.
Yes, so...
That sounds interesting. We might do a program related to to that story. But tonight, it's about persecution. What links you to the persecuted church and persecution subject?
Well, I think if I look back at my own personal life, Paul, as a really small child, I really did cop quite a lot of harassment and bullying at school, growing up as a very small child. The relationship that I had with my father was a very difficult one as well. It was a very, very difficult relationship. And so right from an early age, I really did feel a great deal of pressure to stand up for the things that I really believed were right or true for me. And at school, I really copped quite a bit of punishment, really, from both teachers and some fellow students.
And somehow you felt rejection at the early age?
We used to have debates at school. Debates were a big thing when I was a kid. I don't know if they do them so much these days, but when I was a kid, we'd have debates on various ethical issues. And of course, I would be on a particular side, and when I was asked or questioned as to why I held that view, my belief that there was a God always came into that equation, and this set people against me instantly. And so it wasn't uncommon for me to be sitting in class, to look up and see a bunch of students that were several years older than me coming past the classroom and running their fingers across their throat, showing me that basically I'm dead. My throat's going to be cut for daring to speak up or to say the things.
Because of your views, or specifically because of your faith?
It was specifically because I was brought up as a Mormon kid. I was actually born virtually into Mormonism, and I came out of Mormonism before I was 30. And it was around that time I began to really study the religions of the world, and I began to do a lot of research, and I began to also study the historicity of Mormonism and compare it with the Bible and what Jesus had to say. And I became a Christian just on 20 years ago. So my past was seeped very, very profoundly in religion and religiosity, but I had a personal conviction. This wasn't just my Mormon faith. I had a personal conviction that there was a living God and that I was accountable to him. And so I believe my faith in God as a very young child informed a lot of the decisions and choices that I made.
Okay. And then how the connection with the persecuted church?
I actually think God uses everything in our lives. And as I look back at my life, I was thinking about this on the way over here today, that as I thought about different events that took place when I was at school, some of the terrible things that were done to me at school, simply because I stood up for a kid that was being treated in a very unfair, unjust manner, or because I befriended a kid that was the dag of the school, because I was really an outcast as well. Other kids just didn't like it. And so there was a pack mentality, and, very much like we see a lot of people talking about bullying and harassment in the schools today. But I do believe this developed an empathy and a compassion in me for people who are on the fringes, for people who are on their own, for people that are called maybe to make a really tough stand in very difficult circumstances.
That means in your experience, there is a connection to those who are persecuted anyway, isn't
Absolutely.
it?
This is very personal for me, I think. Yes.
And when was the time that you felt specifically drawn into the persecuted church? Because the church in Australia is not persecuted.
No. Certainly not in the ways that we see overseas. You're right about that.
Yeah.
The mid-90s, I became a Christian. I became a follower of Jesus Christ in 1994. Oh. In 95, I was sitting in a fairly conservative middle-class Baptist church in Camberwell when an elderly gentleman representing a Christian organisation called Voice of the Martyrs came to visit. And he began to share stories of persecution. And he began to share with us, similar to your introduction here today, the numbers of men, women and children who were dying for their faith. He made it very clear that day to us that this was because they named the name of Jesus. And he gave us many, many different stories and examples. I was overwhelmed. My personal reaction to that was quite profound. In fact, I began to shake quite profusely during the service, and I got up from the service before it was even finished, and I ran out into the street because I could not contain the emotions that I was actually feeling about
by the sounds of it, the Voice of the Martyrs is an international organisation?
It is. It's been going since 1967. It was founded by a Romanian Jewish pastor called Richard Wurmbrand, who had spent 14 years in prison for his faith.
Okay, let's have a break and we'll continue shortly. You're watching NAT Chat. We'll be back after the break. Welcome back to NAT Chat, and tonight we continue with the subject of persecution with Kay Harrison. Kay, continue on that moment that you went to this church in Camberwell, you mentioned before. How did this make you feel when you heard about the persecuted church?
Well, there were about 250 people there that day. I don't remember seeing anybody else have that reaction, and I thought it was odd at the time because I was only a new believer. Okay. But when I ran out onto the street, I found myself praying out aloud to God and saying to God, why am I responding this way? Why am I reacting this way? What do you want me to do? And what rose up in me immediately as an answer to that question was that I needed to use my abilities as a writer to make known, not only to the world, but to find a way to reach the persecuted in a meaningful way and let them know that their suffering was not in vain.
That means empathy came very strong in you about the persecuted person, isn't it?
Very, and even now as I think about that experience, it brings up a lot of emotions.
Okay. And also you mentioned that yourself being persecuted as a little child. Of course, it did bring a lot of memories on
it did, and I think coupled with that was that I spent a lot of time out of school because I was a very sick child. So I had pneumonia and pleurisy several times in my early childhood. So I was in hospital for long stints and separated from everybody, and it was a terribly lonely and frightening time.
Yes, which is pretty much the description of the persecuted person.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, and then what happened after that? How did you connect it? How did you find the common ground to connect with the persecuted church?
Well, I immediately got in touch with Voice of the Martyrs Australia when I heard about this organisation, and I started up prayer groups in my house. So I began to invite people to come and join me to pray for specific individuals who were in prison or were undergoing some kind of hardship because they were believers in Christ. And this is what grew for me, this compassion and empathy grew in me for them. And then I finally heard about a young man who was in prison for his faith. He was in prison under a false accusation of blasphemy. And he had been in prison for several years. He had been beaten and stabbed. He'd been shot. He had been terribly treated in this prison. He had been sentenced to death for his faith. And it was as if God had put that man's face and his name in my heart, and I began to do prayer walks on my own through a park, and every day I would pray for him and I would think of him in that cell. And it's as if he came to life for me. There was no divide. He was in Pakistan, I was in Australia. I knew nothing about Pakistan.
Okay.
But I just prayed and just faithfully believed that somehow my prayers would make a difference. And out of that, God put it on my heart to write him a letter, which I did. Sometime later, many years later, I found out that that man had been given a stay of execution. By some miracle, he was actually taken out of prison. He now lives in another country.
All right.
And his brother became a pastor of the Christian faith. He found my letter in his brother's prison file, and he wrote to me to thank me for the support that I gave to his brother. Now, I could never have known that that would happen.
Did he become a pastor in Pakistan?
He
or
did.
In Pakistan?
Yes. The brother of the one who was in prison, who is now living in a foreign country now for his own protection, is now a pastor and has a ministry to Christians in the brick kilns.
Now, apart from the letter, I can see that you have, as an artist, I can see that you have an album here called Church Under Fire.
Yes.
Where does this come from? The name of it?
Yeah, it's interesting actually. A few years ago I came home from working one afternoon and I found a Voice of the Martyrs newsletter in my letterbox. When I opened it up, it was a church building up in flames. Many churches had been razed to the ground at that time, places like China, Indonesia and so forth. And it just simply said, Church Under Fire. And as I began to sit and read the story of what had happened in that particular part of the world, it really hit me that there's kind of a double play here. That yes, it's not just a building that we are talking about. God's people who love Jesus are under fire. They're under heavy fire.
Okay.
And so that's where the title of the album came from. And I sat down at the piano and began to write the song Church Under Fire.
That means the church is not just a building you mentioned.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. When we understand the church is the body of people who love Jesus and who follow him. And I made that connection straight away, and I sat down at the piano in the little studio where I was at the time, and this song just poured out. And it's a song that you will probably play later on in the program.
Yeah, the song I would like you to talk about is the one that we're going to play. Is very, very descriptive of what is happening. Hidden Jesus. Can you just describe to us how this name came up?
It's a verse of scripture from the New Testament that my life is now hidden in Jesus. And it's something that people who are persecuted for their faith in Jesus Christ really understand. They know that their lives are worth nothing here on earth. And if you live in a country like Pakistan, or you're in Indonesia where it's illegal to follow Christ in some parts there, then you know that you run a very high risk of a very early death if you continue to make that stand and continue to worship. So, and so what I did was I was thinking about all the people that I've known about over the years, all the different examples that are in my mind even now of men and women who'd suffered for the Lord. And I began with the sufferings of Christ himself. And so this is a 9-minute song. It's a bit of an epic, but it tells the story, starting with Jesus, all the way down to the present day of various individuals who've suffered for their faith.
Kay, thank you for your passion. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I will invite you for another program to extend, because this topic is quite huge. Because we're talking about thousands of people.
There's a lot to pack into a few minutes, yes.
You are watching NAT Chat. Stay tuned, because after the break, we'll be back with Kay's music, Hidden in Jesus.
cries. My tears flow like rivers poured down from the skies. I taste the hot, salty tears on my tongue. The love of the Father made known in the Son. I cannot be silent, I cannot be still. I'm drawn to his suffering, I'm drawn by his will. My life is now hidden in Jesus, my life in Jesus, my Lord. My life is now hidden in Jesus, my Lord. I am the mother who watches her son, deny not his Savior and fall by the gun. I kneel by his body, I kneel in his blood. Calvary appear like a flood. I carry his body to lay in a tomb. The son of his father, the fruit of my womb. Soldiers of darkness, my innocent slain. A spirit so broken, a hope so forlorn. I cannot bear children, my body so torn. All the pain and the tears, precious things I have lost. I lay all my dreams and desires at the cross. My life is now hidden in Jesus, my life in Jesus, my Lord. My life is now hidden in Jesus, my Lord. I am the brother with acid burned hands for speaking of Jesus in faraway lands. Spoon, but I'm lifting up Jesus, my preaching resumes. I cannot be silent, I cannot be quiet. The love of my Savior is running riot. My life is now hidden in Jesus, my life in Jesus, my Lord. My life is now hidden in Jesus, my Lord. I am the sister bring a people to one who can save. I was somebody's mother and somebody's wife. They've killed my body, but they can't take my life. And the voice of my Savior cries up from the mud. This is my body, this is my blood. My life is now hidden in Jesus. My life in Jesus, my Lord. My life is now hidden in Jesus. My life in Jesus, my Lord. My life separate us from the love of Christ. Should trouble or hardship or persecution, my life separate us from the love of Christ. Should famine or nakedness, danger or sorrow, my life is now hidden in Jesus. My life in Jesus, my Lord. My life is now hidden in Jesus. In Jesus, my Lord. In Jesus, my Lord. In Jesus. In Jesus. In Jesus, my Lord.
MELfeed video.
Welcome to a special presentation of the CEC Report. I'm Robert Barwick. Today we're going to be discussing Labor versus the British money power. The reason for this presentation is the whole world is deep into a global economic breakdown crisis. It's a crisis caused by rampant financial speculation by banks, mostly headquartered in the City of London financial centre. And this has been going on for more than 4 years now, and what governments are doing is bailing those banks out and forcing brutal austerity measures on their populations in order to do so. At a time like this, unless people fight back, but fight back based on principles to put the welfare of human beings first, if we allow these current policies to continue, the conditions for humanity will get worse and worse. And so for Australians, we have a very good historical example of the kind of principles that have to be fought for, because these were the principles that characterised the old Labor Party. It's the reason the Labor Party in this country formed, and it's what they fought for most of their history until the recent decades when they completely sold out to their enemy. And Labor called its enemy the money power. And so in this presentation, we're going to go through that history in a succinct 20 minutes or so, and you, the viewer, will get a very sensuous grasp of just how good the Labor Party used to be, the principled stand it took on the policies that it fought for, And a live example of what Labor should go back to, and if they're not going to go back to it, what the Labor movement, the unions in this country, need to return to fighting for, and in order to do it, join the fight that is being led by the CEC. So with that introduction, we're going to cover the rise of the Australian Labor Party and how its fight against the money power was at the centre of its development. We're going to cover in a little bit of detail Labor's fight for the institution of national banking, and then we're going to finish off by summarising how Paul Keating, from Paul Keating onwards, Paul Keating betrayed the Labor movement to the City of London. So, let's talk about the rise of the Australian Labor Party. Old Labor, or what we would call true Labor, was united from the get-go against the enemy that it called the money power. That term, money power, is a Labor Party term. Now, the CEC is scorned in politics in Australia today for attacking the British. But old Labor, the stalwarts who built the Labor Party, understood the British question just as well as the CEC does today. Now, let me give you a flavour of the CEC's understanding of the British issue. The CEC documents our material in our New Citizen newspaper, and in this edition from October-November 2009, we quote the US physical economist Lyndon LaRouche, who defined the British Empire this way. This was from 8th of September 2009. LaRouche said, "All European imperialism, including British imperialism today, is not based on a landed territory. It's based on an international organisation of the control of money by individuals who form concerts of private interests who set up the control of money, its creation and management. And nation states are subsidiary to this international control of money. The one case in which this was not successful was the formation of the United States." End quote. Now compare that to how the old Labor Party in Australia thought at the turn of the last century. Remember, Labor in Australia was born out of the union wars of the 1890s, the 1890 Maritime Strike and the 1894 Shearers' Strike. These strikes were pitched battles to the death. A lot of unionists died fighting against corporations controlled from London, British banking and British pastoral houses. Most of the sheep stations in Queensland, that was the heart of the Queensland Shearers' Strike, were subsidiaries of British pastoral houses. That they weren't fighting, like the strikers weren't fighting the owners who lived there. The owners lived in London. They were fighting their managers. As early as 1891, the New South Wales Labor Electoral League platform, when the Labor movement first started contesting elections, its platform called for a national bank, as well as, quote, the federation of the Australasian colonies upon a national as opposed to an imperialistic basis. They understood this question of empire. A key fact about the early Labor Party is when they formed, they adopted deliberately the American spelling of Labor, L-A-B-O-R, as opposed to the British spelling of L-A-B-O-U-R, because, as LaRouche alluded to, the early architects of the Labor Party were inspired by America's fight against the money power, which we'll touch on a little bit later in this program. All right, here's how they thought about the money power. The 1907 Brisbane Worker newspaper, which was partly owned by the Australian Workers' Union, they ran this quote in 1907. "The money power, it is the greatest power on earth, and it is arrayed against labour. No other power that is or ever was can be named with it. Yes, so far as we are concerned, the headquarters of the money power is Britain. But the money power is not a British institution. It is cosmopolitan. It is of no nationality, but of all nationalities. It dominates the world." End quote. That was 1907. I want to give you two more quotes from Labor people that show you their understanding of what they were up against with the British. Jack Lang in the 1930s, the Premier of New South Wales, was the Premier of New South Wales. Lang wrote a book called The Great Bust, which is a great history of the labour movement. This is a quote from his book, The Great Bust. "The City of London for more than 200 years dominated the financial affairs of the world. It had mastered the technique of the management of money. London was the exchange hub of the world. The Victorian era had been one of great commercial expansion. With that rare genius for political invention, Gladstone, Disraeli and other British statesmen sought a substitute for the old system of crown colonies. They found it in the British Empire. The formula was to hand the colonies the right to govern themselves, provided they did not break the financial nexus with the City of London." End quote. Now, before I go to the next quote, I want to quote a Prime Minister of Britain from the mid-19th century, William Gladstone, who in 1852 was the Chancellor of the Exchequer of Great Britain. And he made this statement, which is very illuminating to shed light on what Lang was referring to. Quote, "The hinge of the whole situation was this: the government itself was not to be a substantive power in matters of finance, but was to leave the money power supreme and unquestioned." In other words, in Gladstone's own words, he's saying the money power sits above the authority of government. That was the British system, and Lang understood that 80 years later when he was writing. And I want to finish this segment with a quote from Labor pioneer Frank Anstey, who was the mentor of John Curtin, one of the real great Labor thinkers. He wrote a book in 1921 called Money Power, and he zeroed in on the British. Quote, "London is, so far, the web centre of international finance. In London are assembled the actual chiefs or the representatives of the great financial houses of the world. The money power is something more than capitalism. These men constitute the financial oligarchy. No nation can be really free where this financial oligarchy is permitted to hold dominion, and no democracy can be aught but a name that does not shake it from its throne." End quote. We'll resume this when we come back from this break. Welcome back to this special presentation of the CEC report on Labor versus the money power, a historical report that gives an example of how old Labor fought against the money power compared to how Labor in Australia since Hawke and Keating have betrayed Australia to the same City of London money power. Now we're going to talk about Labor's fight for national banking. As I said in the last section, as early as 1891, the New South Wales Labor Electoral League's fighting platform called for national banking. In 1908, an American who had come to Australia in the 1890s, named King O'Malley, who had joined the Labor Party and became a federal member of Parliament upon federation, and who had fought his whole political career for Australia to adopt American-style national banking. This American's name was King O'Malley. He succeeded in getting federal Labor to adopt national banking on its federal fighting platform, and that was at the Brisbane Conference of the ALP in 1908. After that, King O'Malley formed what he called the Torpedo Brigade, which was a subsection of the Federal Labor Caucus of people who were all committed to getting a national bank started, people like Frank Anstey and William Guthrie Spence, the founder of the Australian Workers' Union, and they called it the Torpedo Brigade to ram it through. There were people in Labor then who were scared of the prospect, or who were in the pockets even then, of banking interests from Collins Street in Melbourne, who opposed it. So to succeed required this kind of effort that O'Malley led. They succeeded in 1911. It got adopted in caucus, and in December 1911, the Commonwealth Bank Act passed the Federal Parliament, and it began operation on July 1st, 1912. Now remember the Gladstone quote from the previous segment, where he said the heart of the British system is that the government should have no involvement in finance. And you'll hear that repeated lots of times today. That's a mantra today. Government should not be involved in finance. Well, this institution, when they set up the Commonwealth Bank, represented the opposite. It represented the idea that government, which represents the people, takes charge of the money power of a nation for the good of the people. The best way to summarise how the Commonwealth Bank functioned is again from Jack Lang's book, The Great Bust. I'm going to read a lengthy quote here, but it's very enlightening. Lang reported, quote, "In Australia, the war, as i.e. World War I, had been financed by the then newly established Commonwealth Bank. It had found all the money to keep the armies abroad and also to finance the producers at home. It had financed the Commonwealth shipping line deal for Hughes. Denison Miller, who was the governor of the bank, had gone to London after the war had finished and had thrown a great fright into the banking world by calmly telling a big bankers' dinner that the wealth of Australia represented 6 times the amount of money that had been borrowed, and that the bank could meet every demand because it had the entire capital of the country behind it. The bank had found £350 million for war purposes. A deputation of unemployed waited on him, Miller, after he arrived back from London at the head office of the Commonwealth Bank in Martin Place, Sydney. He was asked whether his bank would be prepared to raise another £350 million for productive purposes. He replied that not only was his bank able to do it, but would be happy to do it. Such statements as these caused a near panic in the City of London. If the Dominions were going to become financially independent of the City of London, then the entire financial structure would collapse. Basically, it was a problem of banking. Some formula had to be devised which would enable local institutions such as the Commonwealth Bank of Australia to be drawn into the City of London's net. The financial experts studied the problem deeply. Out of their deliberations emerged the plan to centralise the control of all banking throughout the empire by channeling it directly into the supervision by the Bank of England. If, for example, the Bank of England could control the Commonwealth Bank of Australia, there should be no impediment in the way of controlling the government of the country as well. The death of Miller removed at a critical moment the one man capable of defending the citadel of Australian financial independence. On Miller's death, his position as the sole governor of the Commonwealth Bank was abolished, and the Stanley Melbourne Bruce government moved swiftly to replace that position with a board. And the board was drawn largely from big representatives of big business. So private financial interests were put in charge of this bank. This came to a head in 1929 when the Great Depression struck. And the Great Depression itself was an example of what Lang talked about in terms of the power of the Bank of England, because it was caused in Australia by the Bank of England reducing Australia's currency by about 1/3 in quantity, and that caused the depression here. The new Labor government that had come to power under Jim Scullin and under the leadership of Treasurer Ted Theodore directed the Commonwealth Bank, their own bank, to issue £18 million for public works so that people could be employed. And what ensued then was a standoff between the government and the management of its own bank, because the management under the chairman of the board, Sir Robert Gibson, said, quote, "I bloody well won't do what you're asking me to do." At the same time as this standoff was going on, Sir Robert Gibson and leading financiers organised paramilitary, pro-fascist secret armies prepared to run coups against Scullin and Lang. It didn't eventuate because Lang was sacked as the Premier of New South Wales. Federal Labor split, and people like Joe Lyons in Federal Labor joined with Menzies in the United Australia Party, and the bank never got to play the role it could to get Australia out of the Depression. In 1936, a Royal Commission was held into banking in Australia that Ben Chifley, the great Labor future Prime Minister, sat on. That commission had some problems, but in its findings it declared an important principle, which was that the government should have the final say on national finances. That Royal Commission, in other words, overturned what Gladstone had said 100 or so years before. The findings of that Royal Commission were ignored by the Lyons-Menzies government until Curtin took power in World War II in 1942. And then in the context of the war, Curtin and Chifley gave the Commonwealth Bank back the powers that the Royal Commission said it should have, and the bank functioned brilliantly during World War II to finance Australia's wartime mobilisation that saved us from Japanese invasion in World War II, and it continued to function after World War II. Ben Chifley tried to pass a law to make the wartime controls of banking that had worked so brilliantly during the war, to make them permanent after the war. he was blocked. So then he resorted to nationalising all banks in Australia, and of course then the British Crown's own Privy Council overturned that, and it failed, and Chifley lost office in 1949. The last hurrah of the Commonwealth Bank as a national bank was when it played a role in financing the commencement of the Snowy Mountain scheme, which has been such an important infrastructure scheme in Australian history to this day. That is a brief history of the Labor Party's fight for national banking. When we come back, we're going to go through a summary of what went wrong. Welcome back to this special edition of the CEC Report on Labor versus the money power. And finally, we're going to talk about how Keating betrayed Labor to the City of London. In the last segment, we gave the history of Labor's fight for national banking leading up to World War II and just immediately after that when Ben Chifley lost office in 1949. Let me begin 1972, when Labor returned to power after 23 years in opposition under the new Prime Minister Gough Whitlam. Labor in 1972 was a bit of a rabble. By that I mean they had all kinds of Fabian society influences by then. They had a green streak. That was the beginning of the green movement today, etc. However, it also included the last gasp of old Labor. The return of Labor to power coincided with a period of global upheaval around the end of the Bretton Woods system in 1971, which was the system of fixed exchange rates tied to the US dollar tied to gold, which had provided stability for the world financial system for 20 years or so. In Whitlam's Labor government, there were two figures in particular who represented old Labor. Rex Connor, the Minister for Minerals and Energy, and Jim Cairns, who would become the Treasurer under Whitlam. Now, Connor, I want to read from a quote about Connor from a book called Unfinished Business, Paul Keating's Interrupted Revolution, because Connor had a junior minister, Paul Keating, in the Whitlam government. This book talks about Connor's outlook. It says, Connor was a crazy old patriot. He had a detailed knowledge of Australia's mineral and energy resources and a bold plan. It was his belief that we should face the rest of the world with our resources piled behind us and stand as a bull terrier guard dog does when it faces the street. We should have no truck with international private enterprise, i.e. the money power. We should develop our resources with our own public sector loan money under public sector ownership with no share of ownership going to non-Australians. That's their characterisation of Connor. Connor, in pursuing his dream to buy back the farm and build things like pipelines across Australia, etc., they needed financing. His key ally was Jim Cairns. In the last few years of his life, Jim Cairns worked with the CEC back at the turn of this century, fighting for a national bank. And I probably did the last interview that Jim Cairns ever gave while he was alive, before he died. And I asked Jim Cairns why they pursued foreign loans instead of national banking. And what Cairns revealed is he wanted national banking. He wanted to restore the Reserve Bank of Australia to be a proper national bank and finance it that way. But after 23 years in opposition, following Labor losing power over that issue, they didn't have the stomach for it in the federal caucus. I asked Cairns, at the time, was there a lot of support for Chifley among the Labor Party? Yes, a great deal of support for what Chifley did. And of course his death was a great loss to the Labor Party. They were followed by a man who wasn't really a Labor man, Bert Evett, a lawyer, and it took the substance out of Labor. I asked, 25 years later, under the next Labor government, when you proposed borrowing from the Reserve Bank to finance your programs, was this supported by the other Labor MPs? Cairns says, I can't say that it was. It wasn't opposed, but it wasn't really put to them. I wasn't too sure how it would go, and I knew there would be support for it amongst what we call the left wing, but I knew there would be opposition from what we call the right wing. And so I asked him, in the 25 years since they'd last fought for it, support for national banking had diminished quite a lot, and Dr. Cairns replied, yes, certainly it did. And because Labor did not have the stomach for it, and there was only a few stalwarts left in the old Labor Party, they went onto the path of borrowing foreign loans to buy back the farm, and it proved to be a disaster. it became the catalyst for the Queen seizing an opportunity to sack the Whitlam government, because it was her company, Rio Tinto, that stood to lose the most out of this Buy Back the Farm program. I want to read something that captures the spirit of the time, though. When Rex Connor was forced to resign as a minister in the Whitlam government, his final parting words was this small poem: "Give me men to match my mountains. Give me men to match my plains. Men with freedom in their vision and creation in their veins." It was the Queen herself who moved to remove the threat posed by Labor's Buy Back the Farm policy to the British Crown's control of Australia's raw materials by sacking the Whitlam government. Her own company, Rio Tinto, stood to lose the most from the Buy Back the Farm policy. Governor-General Sir John Kerr coordinated his plot to sack Whitlam with Buckingham Palace every step of the way. So what happened to change Labor from that outlook to the globalist, free trade, green and pro-money power party it is today? Central to that shift was Paul Keating. Paul Keating was Rex Connor's junior minister, who also fought hard against Rio Tinto's control of Australia's raw materials. However, after the Whitlam dismissal, he was the opposition spokesman on minerals and energy, and in that capacity he was wined and dined by the mining industry. You can read any Keating biography you like, they all emphasise that that was the period in which his outlook was transformed. Essentially, Paul Keating became pro-free trade, and he decided that Australia's economic future lay in exporting raw materials and becoming a centre for financial services, or the Wall Street of the South, as he called it. And it's because he adopted that outlook that his backers made sure he became the treasurer. Paul Keating and Bob Hawke used subterfuge to ram through Keith Campbell's Financial System Inquiry report, which report demanded every aspect of public credit in Australia be dismantled, including the Australian Industry Development Corporation, which was the government investing in developing secondary industry, the Commonwealth Bank, and the Commonwealth Development Bank, which directed preferential lending to farming and manufacturing. In other words, Keating, by doing this, took Australia back to the Gladstone mantra mentioned earlier of removing the government from any role in finance to leave the money power supreme and unquestioned. The CEC has documented this period in our literature and in press releases on our website. Look up the citizen newspapers that I've referred to and go to our website and check it out for yourself. But in conclusion, Australia has no future unless the old Labor tradition of fighting against the money power for the common good of all is revived. The CEC is the only political organisation in Australia that today is continuing that fight. We are circulating a national resolution calling for the repeal of all economic reforms since Keating and the establishment of tough financial regulations and a new national bank. The Labor movement, the broad union movement in this country that still wants to fight for conditions for working people, must return to their roots and fight the money power by joining the CEC. Thanks for tuning into this special CEC report on Labor versus the money power. Tune in next week for more of the CEC report.
Now it's time for a quick reminder of programs coming up tonight on MELfeed.video, so please stay with us.
Alleluia. Om Mani Padme Om.
Hello and welcome to Harmony in Diversity, a program that endeavours to encourage harmony and diversity across the wide range of faiths and beliefs here in Victoria by showcasing individuals and groups involved in interfaith and multi-faith activities. This is the last episode in our current series. In this episode, we will be hearing from many of the people we have interviewed over the rest of the series and listening to their responses on why they think interfaith contact is important and what they find common to people of all faiths.
I think through engaging with people from other beliefs and religions is very significant for any spiritual person, because that's how we come to understand that deep down inside, we all share the same core values, and that is love and compassion for all sentient beings. That's what we call it in Buddhism. And that's very similar to, say, the Christians, who they say the agape love, which is love for God and love for all. And even with the Muslims, the Sikh religion, everybody deep down inside shares this. And although we have a lot of different beliefs and theories in other aspects, but this is the core value that does not change, and that's very beautiful.
Like religion has at times been seen to have been the cause of disunity, so it's it's a wonderful thing to be able to interact with other faiths and to see the similarities between them all. When you're hearing different readings and different quotes from different teachings and different religions, you're being exposed to the fact that they're very, very similar. And the spiritual laws are things that is like a common thread that flows through social laws that change, according to the time in which these teachings were revealed. So it's important in the sense that it breaks down barriers, I suppose.
I often use the analogy of fruit salad in my presentations. Just like different fruits make together a fruit salad and provide nourishment while retaining their original identity, an interfaith alliance works exactly the same way. We all need to keep our values and our religious beliefs intact, preserve them, but yet as an interfaith community work together to become a productive group as a whole.
The true Hindu philosophy it is about pluralism at its very core. It doesn't recognize one way of looking at religion, because it understands that throughout the course of human history, as our philosophies have changed throughout culture and time, we come to conceive of this idea of God or something greater than ourselves in many different ways, and that's what religion represents. It represents humanity's different grapplings with this conceptualization that there's something greater to life than just living and dying in this form.
I think the important parts are that we can learn from each other. I think religion is basically not static. Religion is developing and growing as a framework for modern life. It has to be relevant. It has to respond to issues that challenge us today, such as family violence, the White Ribbon Day that's going on at the moment, and such as environmental challenges or pollution or unemployment or financial crises. If religion doesn't talk to those issues which are crucial to people's lives, then what's the point? I would put that in terms of, we might go and pray in our own ways in our synagogues or churches or wherever we do, but if you don't put prayer into practice, what's the point? It has to change us. It has to motivate us. It has to make us better people, or I would say it has to enable us to achieve more of our God-given potential.
I think that all spiritual traditions are really interested in the development and transformation of the individual. And where most individuals are stuck, and I'll say pretty much all people are stuck, is a very self-centered approach to life. And that doesn't bring happiness, because it's at odds with the way things are. It's at odds with the way that you're interconnected with others. It's at odds with the way to genuinely sort of develop a happy mind through selfishness. It doesn't work, just practically speaking. So to have compassion enthroned at the center of your religious tradition is an extremely pragmatic, useful way to transform yourself, because it opposes and antidotes directly this self-centeredness, selfishness, which causes all of our suffering. And also, the world is full of real suffering and tragedy. So if our spirituality is disconnected from that, then we have to worry, because spirituality should be answering our own needs, but it should also be trying to answer the needs of the world, thinking beyond just ourselves. You know, it's very, very, very good to go and sit in a cave, you know, and meditate for 10, 20 years. But there's also something absolutely essential with looking beyond yourself, putting another in the place of yourself, and really seeking to help. Because that is really where the rubber hits the road in terms of spirituality. It doesn't have the ability to really transform you and the society. So I have no gripes with saying that compassion is one of, you know, the, if not the core belief in all spiritual traditions. At least it should be. It should be enthroned as a really, really important thing.
It was the epiphany I had a few weeks ago, is that all of the traditions, they're fundamentally about connection. You know, how do we connect to one another? What is the point of our existence? Why are we here? They give us a framework with which to, I guess, understand life and what it might possibly be about. In terms of our shared values, I think we have several, you know. The need to love and to be loved, I think, would be what every tradition is really about. It's about, you know, harmony, and I don't just mean harmony as in living, you know, in harmony with people of different backgrounds. I mean, you know, inner peace and then outer peace. And I think ideas of compassion, compassion I think would probably be the real core, the real tie that binds, to understand that as human beings and as a living being, we all have needs, we all suffer, and we all deserve dignity and respect. And I think that idea of compassion and being able to understand that those needs transcend difference is a core of all traditions. Respect and being another one of those, I would say.
So you think there is definitely a commonality behind all faiths, a common divine element?
Oh, definitely. There is what makes us click, what makes us be who we are. There is, even science have not been able to really pinpoint that explanation. But there is something, we are born, we click, we die. What actually happens, that is a mystery which always will be. And the commonality that we are human beings, we share this planet together. We all are taught to learn how to be honest, to respect each other, to be caring for one another. And these are the commonalities we have. Yeah, let's serve, let's live together. That's what I strongly believe.
From a Baha'i point of view, the commonality is definitely that they are all true religions from God and come with a specific purpose to educate humanity for that time and place that those messengers of God came for. So the unity amongst them amongst those messengers of God is incredibly important. And if you really look to the heart of them, without, you know, kind of disregarding the external forms of the religion, which can be different, the heart of them is very similar. You know, it's about the human soul and the spirit, and its progress towards God, and as well as that, how do we live in our world as a spiritual being? How do we develop? How do we get on with each other? So I think that is the one critical point, that we have to see all of the religions as coming from one source. If we don't see that, then I think it's very difficult to be able to come to terms with each other. I think we have to, when we're talking to people of other religions, we have to really be able to be detached from our own ideas and our own preconceptions to try and free ourselves of that kind of dogmatic interpretation which can blind ourselves to the truth that other religions hold.
Compassion, I think, is the human reaction that certainly comes out of that understanding of that human imperative, yes. Compassion is the thing we share as people of faith. And I'm not saying that people without faith can't be compassionate, but it's a compassion for people of faith that is derived from their faith imperative. It gives shape to expressing their faith. And yes, I think we can describe that commonality as being compassion.
I think there's a belief that human beings are not the top of the tree, if you like. If we adopt the approach that we are the only beings to whom we are necessarily accountable, we're only accountable to ourselves, then I think we're exalting ourselves to a position beyond where we are. I feel that we have a higher level of accountability, and I think a lot of religions believe in exactly the same thing, that we've developed over a substantial period of time, but we are not just simply accountable only to ourselves. We are accountable to the broader community, and we're accountable to perhaps a higher being that we don't profess to really understand. And I think all religions have that concept.
I think most faiths have a concern for justice, for education, for reconciliation. They all care about their families, as you've already indicated. They all have an ethical basis of how we should live. Forgiveness is important. They're all concerned to live in peace and harmony. Just sometimes it gets thwarted along the way. That you can find those places where you can meet and communicate, and it's a spiritual place. It's beyond all the formalities of how we might worship or how we might live, but it's a sacred space.
I said before, I think compassion is at the heart of all faith traditions. I do think there is a call to serve, an altruism, a wish to benefit others. So if we can embrace that and celebrate that, all the better. That's when interfaith is working. When interfaith calls you to be a better Christian or me to be a better Buddhist, that's when it's really working.
What do you think ordinary people can do to promote harmony and understanding amongst the various different faiths?
I think it all starts with the basis of treating people with dignity and respect. I think for far too long in history we have had a level of suspicion, and that arises out of lack of understanding. And I think if we have just simply to have a level of dialogue with people from other faiths, we realise that they're in fact not all that different at a very basic level than ourselves. All people endeavour to live, I believe, a life of peace and harmony with other people. There are some people who like to have good debates and that sort of thing, but I think most people don't want to live in a state of conflict with people. And getting to know and understand people much better contributes considerably to that. I remember there was an event occurred in Melbourne just after September 11. It was a couple of days later, and there was a Muslim woman who had her head covered with a scarf. She wasn't in the full burqa, but just her head covered, who got on a tram. And one particular guy on the tram got up and told her to get off the tram, and clearly blamed her for the events of September 11. And I thought it was wonderful how a number of other people on the tram actually came to her defence and said, you can't blame her and you can't blame her religion and for the events that happened on September 11. She was not a part of it, and you can't treat her as if she was responsible. And a situation which was developing, which could have ended up in some violence, because I think he was about ready to throw her off the tram physically, managed to calm down, and people then went about their business. But I think the fact that people were willing to defend this particular Muslim woman is an illustration that there's a lot of good in people, and people are able to look at things in a calm and rational way, even in an excited moment like that. And if that means that people will treat other people with dignity and respect, then I think any level of interfaith dialogue which adds to that, I think, is then a wonderful thing.
I think that we can promote understanding of other religions and spiritual paths by trying to be open and really trying to break down the ignorance that has developed about other religions often, and the prejudices. You know, I think that we really need to look at other religions without that veil of what we've grown up with, that we think about Islam, or that we think that Christians do, or that other religions, you know, they may sound strange to us, but I think we really need to be able to, you know, search after the truth behind the religions, with a freedom of prejudice and freedom of thought.
I think just really, if you come from a tradition, I think there's this mentality where, because we live in a very secular world, that, you know, we need to leave our religiosity or these values, we check them at home and then we go into our everyday lives. And I find that to be troubling, because, you know, we've set up these institutions where the values of compassion, of respect, of understanding, of harmony are seen as being something that we keep to ourselves at home along with our other religious beliefs. And I think with this idea of secularism, it's been obviously a positive in many ways, but we have to understand that our inherent interconnectedness as people living on this planet, you know, we need to figure out how we can bring those values into our everyday lives, into our work, into our jobs, into our relationships, into the way we consume, and the way we live. So I think the everyday person, what you can do for interfaith or for multi-faith is really just live what you believe, you know, and we all talk about these shared values, whether we're secular humanists or we come from a particular religious tradition, to be that, you know, we want love, we want to be treated compassionately, we want to live in respect, and we want to have dignity, is to actually treat everyone. It's such an age-old saying, you know, treat others as you would wish to be treated is the best thing you can really do for interfaith. Because if we all live by those values that all of our traditions talk about, we wouldn't have so many of the problems we have today.
I think if we can all start sharing our rich faith traditions, if we can all appreciate one another. So as a local being, I think it's important for us to learn about one another instead of pointing finger, oh, that woman is wearing a hijab, you know, she might be a Muslim terrorist, or look at me, many people see me and I'm a Sikh, but they all think I'm Muslim, and they'd ask, are you Muslim? I said, no, the Muslims are my brothers and sisters. I'm a Sikh. And that itself becomes quite surprising to people. If we can learn these little basic things about each other, I would like to see in our schools from a very young age, right, from kindergarten, children taught about one another, little things. I'm not saying go and learn theology as such, but understand why a young boy is wearing a turban, or why that girl is not wanting to eat this food. It could because it's non-halal, or the issue of, little things about, and the richness that this person looks different than me, but where is she from, what is the language they speak, those little basic knowledge of each other will become a very rich society. And then respect is what is beginning to miss, I find, in society. Because of the lack of knowledge more than anything else, the fear that the neighbor is different and so he might not be as kind and gentle or honest as one is.
The cheapest thing that anyone can do is to have a smile on his or her face. That will definitely build lots of bridges with other people and start off some very interesting and very worthwhile conversations that would be beneficial to the person who's giving and the person who's taking. So it's important that we get to understand that human beings are the same, or the same needs and same requirements. Hence, it's important that we give and take with other people, dialogue with them, talk with them. That will make life a lot easier and a lot more understandable rather than it is.
I think by recognizing that unless if there is harmony and unity and understanding in our homes and in our immediate environment, that will never translate into the rest of the community. And I think it's a message that we have overlooked because there is so much family breakdown and so much breakup of relationships in general. So it's important to every day that we get up in the morning to make a pact with ourselves that we are going to forge bonds of unity with people that are around us, whether it's at work, whether it's with members of our family, with people that we come across on our way to work. Any dealings that we have with human beings needs to have that message of oneness and harmony through it. If we all do that in our own private lives, it's inevitable that that harmony will translate into our workplace, from our workplace to the rest of the society, to the nation, and to the world scene. We have to start from home to be able to translate it to the rest.
That's all for our program, both for today and for this series. For more information, and if you want to see this episode again, visit our website, harmonyanddiversity.net. We hope to be back with a second series later in the year. Goodbye for now.
Baha'u'llah, Shanti Om, Allahu
Here are the current weather readings for Melbourne, Geelong and Shepparton on the MELfeed.video weather wall. It also includes tomorrow's forecast and expected minimum temperatures in these areas overnight. This is the MELfeed.video weather wall. We are currently looking for a sponsor. If you're interested, please email Michael at MELfeed.video for more details.
Imagine not seeing the world you live in. Macular disease is Australia's leading cause of blindness. Donate now to Macular Disease Foundation Australia. Call 1800 111 709 or visit mdfoundation.com.au.
Man to man, it's time to stop.
Stop the tragic waste of life and the destruction of families, including your own.
Stop blaming drugs and alcohol and believing that walking away makes you weak.
Stop thinking you're a hero and wasting your life behind bars, wishing you could take that one moment back.
Stop the coward's punch.
Playing the 80s on Air FM 88.0.
Hi, this is Darren McAlane from Air FM Drive. Join me from 3 to 6 p.m. every afternoon on 88.0 in Penrith, and also you can catch me on tunein.com. That's from 3 to 6 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time.
Playing the 80s on Air FM 88.0.
MELfeed.video.
This program is proudly sponsored by Overload Poetry Inc., producers of the Melbourne Overload Poetry Festival, and by Westward Poetry, the Western Suburbs' premier poetry reading.
I'm Jenny Mitchell, and I've also painted a lot of the poets that are reading here this afternoon. Behind me is a portrait of Jeff Page, and Jeff's come down from Canberra to read for us this afternoon.
It's a bit intimidating reading beside the portrait. That's my deeper personality. What I'll start with actually is a poem. You hear that all right? A poem written from the experience of being painted by Jenny. It's called Oil on Canvas. In just 2 afternoons, she says, she'll have you drying on the canvas. First the ground, a tradesman's job. She almost does it with the roller. As Terps begins to sting the nose, the squeezing out of tubes brings back a child forgotten in a bathroom. And now refinements to the light, the stepping back with one eye closed, perspectives of the thumb and forefinger. You seek and hold a single pose, suggestive of your disposition. It seems to summarise your life and find a stiffness at the elbow, a minor miracle at work, the transfer of your soul to canvas. You see the movement coming through like notes escaping from a speaker, and sense, although you do not see, adjacencies of graded colour, a range of greys defined by brown, the bar lines of a favourite shirt, the salt and pepper of your hair. The brush is just a smear of sound. It's better when you take it fast. She shares this one small thing with God. The more you work on them, she smiles, the older they turn out. And that was 13 years ago.
A giant with words pointed and filled me with trouble. I take the concrete wreck and dice a misfit, reassembling matching corners. You made me a puzzle solver, carrier of empty bottles, a fatherless child. I hissed at the ground and could never forget your late night wish for me to be dead. On my way home to domestic, a distraction flecked its muscles and licked its paw. In return, I hummed it a song, remembered from childhood. Thank you.
Isolated commentary. My attention spans the four corners of this page in thirst of knowledge. My mind sketches rough symbols, icons that hold little worth. My dreams reveal a world that's strange, yet in the same way oddly familiar. My hope gives love a meaning, and I a reason to exist. My attempts at constructing courage protect me from this ruthless isolation. My writings will hold little sense, but serve as commentary to my life. Leave here inspired, not by words, but by the charity of man. For as I stand exposed, I leave my heart to you.
First poem I'm going to read is called Tempest Gun Cafe. Midnight, she gazed skyward, our moonless Tempest Gun Cafe of death. 15 seconds to decide. Scream flash pops fast. A glowing inferno of zeppelins falling. sparking our dumb curiosity. A wooden doorframe falls. We are its superior speed target. No propaganda at all for us. And the toll of death begins. Searchlight rings. Target blackout. Unstoppable. Her scarf gondola formations crashed with an indescribable roar. Darkness of my friend. A ring of her searchlights searching the sky. A strange darkness before. Enormous burning patrolling airships fall again, splittering, fuel embedded. Some soft earth within her tears. Fucked up bodies of airship headstones lie in churchyards of cement paper. The rebuttal of our street sign. The storm dogs bark at souvenir hunters. Through the engine drones, a diving man is soaked in her death matter. No more Tempest Gun Cafe. A moonless midnight spilt upon her breasts. Thank you.
My first poem is titled Murrumbidgee. Children play on the banks of the Murrumbidgee. A cricket match in progress. 6, yells the umpire. Kids dive into its cool, murky depths. 25 of the driest years have flown past. The majestic river now a rivulet in a concrete landscape, which is drier than any parched memory. The land out here is arid and rough. The farmers who survive are extremely tough. Generations have held on in years so dry, relying on nature to get them by. The red marauder water horror has now crossed every town and border, uncovering rustic relics of days gone by. The squatters and farmers look to the sky and pray that this is not their last goodbye.
This time last year there were a number of poets who read a tribute to Shelton Lee, and I think it's very important to keep his memory alive with us, and I think it's wonderful that the Shelton Lee Reading Room is here at Montsalvat. But the poem of his that I particularly love was the one about the old lady in the bus, the peach Melba hat. I penned a very humble response. I'm keeping my eye out for a peach Melba hat, and I will keep it in soft tissue paper in a white cardboard box. When I am 80, I will wait for a day when the sun shines warmly, and I will feel my white linen dress smooth against my skin. And I will sit stately in my years in the right seat at the back of the right bus. And I will wait and watch for the smile and the charming words. I will accept them as they are. I will catch them before they are stifled by the gauche etiquette of some imbecile protecting my age dignity, possibly spit as I remind of my aged femininity. Thank you. And on the same theme, I'll finish with a poem I wrote some years ago called My Legs. And I was gratified that Shelton liked this one too. It's on the theme of ageing. I thought it was bad then. As the years have gone on since I've written this poem, I was bloody well off then, never mind. Okay, My Legs, very short. Not my legs, the poem. Oh, they're medium. Inside my legs are my legs. The ones that clicked on stiletto heels and stretched hot brown on chlorine concrete. My legs between grey tunic pleats and white socks and black school feet. Netball scars new on my knees, on older scars of gritty roads and wobbly wheels. I know these legs inside my legs. Now, train lines of purple blue have made some alien tattoo on my legs. Thank you.
I'm able to dream, I'm able to smile, I'm able to grow, and I'll go the extra mile, one day at a time. So put your hands together, change lives forever. Together, we're able.
Able Australia. Together, we're able.
You're there when they can't sleep. You're there when they forget. But who's there when they're at school? Asthma can be serious. It affects 1 in 10 Australians and claims 400 lives each year. Does anyone at your school know what to do in an asthma emergency? Log on to asthmafriendlyschools.org.au and find out if your school is asthma friendly. Shouldn't every school be asthma friendly?
Here is some brilliant news for adults who have difficulties with spelling, reading a newspaper or phone bill, or writing letters and emails. It can be easier to improve your reading and writing skills than to keep putting it off. Take the plunge. Call the Reading Writing Hotline, 1300 655 06.
1300 655 06.
It could change your life.
This one called The Problem. I grew up on a cattle station. The problem is he reads too much, stays up later than he should, turning back to George III and hearing in the Moon and Rapids whispers of a vanished tribe. There's truths that lie between the pages, silent truths that ruin sleep. The homestead poles grow insecure, as if some hawser had been loosened. The fence posts shift within their holes, and cattle rise to graze in air. The hardwood floor grows light beneath him. And having nowhere else to go, each night the house will lift its timbers. The soil below grows scarred and blurred, although indelible with sweat. Each night for hours upon its moorings, the homestead hangs suspended there, a kite of weatherboard in air. And only dawn, with all its weight, can bring it down again. And
play it down, light eater, impossible dreamer. Drab, daft knowledge lies before me, shows me some thigh, tempts me to drift. In my mind, I am still cloud watcher, rain chaser, child warrior who is scared of what lurks in the dark. It tells me to close my mouth and lay still, don't breathe, as an itch draws my attention to my flesh. But beneath my many layers, I am tired, and my fingers are gooey like ice cream, and my mind is a too hot summer's day. I melt, I disappear, and the jester is none the wiser. Thank you.
Words don't fly as smoothly as they once did. These are simple midnight markings, hieroglyphics pulled from my childhood past. These are the ligaments torn from dreams, mutated beyond recognition. These are the scraps of my imagination I could not bring myself to burn. Words don't fly as smoothly as they once did. I buried it all. Paintings, cards, letters from fallen friends, in a big red box of memories. A time capsule that I hide and dare not open again. Words don't fly as smoothly as they once did. Amid this nonsense scribble of carefully replicated shapes, will I find the lucid answers to questions I am yet to ask? Words won't fly as smoothly as I wish they would. These are simple midnight markings, hieroglyphics, pulled from my childhood past.
I grew up on the Clarence River, and that's where I hope my ashes will be scattered. And this is a codicil to go with my will, giving instructions. Codicil. And then, when you've acquired the ashes, that crushed white gravel in a box, carry them north to the Clarence River, a 2-day trip to close the curve. Late spring or early summer, October might be best, and check before you leave it's not in flood. The time, I think, might be, say, 5 o'clock, just when the shade comes off the mountain. The water will be almost still, a deep, unending green, with one faint, indecisive breeze to bend the surface slightly. The heat by then will start to lift, the river start to fill with evening. pause here now together briefly. Then one of you, my son I think, will take the box, remove the lid and in a single easy sweep disperse my body on the river. If done with grace, it ought to make a long descending curve, as if a net were being cast. You'll hear then just the slightest sound, a run of sand across the water, the near end hitting first, and then the high reach of the arc. And when you've finished this, my son, I'd have you pause 2 minutes more before you climb the bank again and let the upstream view delight your eyes.
This is called Where the Windmills Grow. Once a year we go to where the windmills grow. The sweet country smell wafts over us. Eucalypt and flowers float on the breeze. And in all the sweetness, our hearts break with every step. The air swirls, the windmills twirl. On we walk determined to finish our pilgrimage. A lone bird squawks, reminding us of what's to come. The windmills twirl. The view is beautiful here, although it brings us no cheer. To view the statues or vistas, we see the windmills. Plastic dolls in faded boxes, toys and matchbox cars, untouched by their owners. Silently, the windmills turn. We talk in reverent tones. Why do we whisper? So he can hear. The air swirls, the windmills twirl, our hearts float on the breeze. Our pilgrimage finished, daily we leave the place where the windmills grow. My ageless nephew, so small yet sweet, is buried where the windmills grow.
This one's called Human Dust. He inhaled the human dust. It filled his lungs. It swirled around trying to escape the screams, the last words, the moments of lives cut short. He stood motionless, hearing voices lost somewhere they couldn't escape from. He began to wipe the human dust from himself. He clawed at it with ripe, bloody fingernails, the pain in his limbs tightening and tightening the dust that covered his face. He wanted to taste it with his tongue, but the taste was all he could hear. It had a sound that could rip his tongue in half. The lives were growing tighter and tighter, giving him their pain. It was all too much. He whipped his hands at himself. Maybe if he ran, the dust would dissipate, but the lungs were full of it. He rammed his fist into his mouth to choke himself. He wrenched. The fist spewed from his mouth's grip. He wrenched again, spitting blood and dust. Thank you.
I'll read a few poems from this book, Darker and Lighter, that came out about 5 years ago. And this is a story my father used to tell, called The Lid. He saw this happen. The story keeps on coming back. A man my father knew, that grazier across the river up north a mile or two. A story that my father spun to last me all my life, of how a man should not behave when burying a wife. All through the funeral he'd wept, the priest there going on about St. Peter and the gates through which his wife had gone. His sobbing at the grave, Dad found, was harder still to bear. The men in suits, the women in the best they had to wear, knew deeper down it couldn't pass, no matter who had died. Extravagance like this was always better kept inside. At last, the man who sent his beasts to die on Tuesdays gave one final high, unseemly cry and leapt into the grave. "Mate," he yelled, "don't go, don't go," and scrabbled at the wood. A friend reached in to fish him out, as any Christian would. The women in their hats stood back. 2 men jumped in the trench and, skidding on the polished lid, contrived at last to wrench him out and lead him to his car. The clergyman intoned, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. They heard the broken moans coming from a side window. He hammered at the wheel. "Mate," he yelled, "don't leave me, mate." Not knowing what to feel, the mourners now were drifting off towards their dusty cars. My father always finished here as if he'd gone too far. But I could hear the slamming doors, the hearse without much chrome, and dual decisions made to miss the wake and head straight home. "Mate, oh mate," the man had cried, releasing all their fears. The sound of boots on coffin wood survives them down the years.
Do you currently have a community service announcement on free-to-air television? If you do, you can now submit it to us as well via our website at MELfeed.video. We have lots of time to fill on these broadcasts, and we are sure to give your announcement a great run on MELfeed.video.
Behind every great athlete, there is a great support network. Australian Athletes with a Disability and Wheelchair Sports Australia help athletes realise their full potential.
Gonna go from 3, yes!
No matter their ability, we're there to support them. Sporting opportunities for all abilities. For more information, visit sports.org.au.
Hello. I'd like you to put your hand up to the screen and place it on mine. Now, if you drive when you've been taking drugs and you kill someone, this will be as close as you get to your family for a very long time.
There's quite a few agnostic poems in my oeuvre, and have this ongoing battle with God, which he seems to be winning most of the time. Credo. The dark night of the soul agnostic prefers the right to doubt. The world's too much beset by those who know what they're about. The dark night of the soul agnostic says, yes, maybe, although he has his own utopias, but would like you to know that in a year or so he might prefer another view, and even all his sceptic's faith could one day vanish too. But this, he's fairly sure, would fade and doubt come back once more. The dark night of the soul agnostic does not besiege your door. He builds no temple out of bricks and does not like to preach. He thinks conviction more impressive, slightly out of reach. And
I shake down the need to kill you with a gun or a knife or gas you or my own life. I need a wife, a pink ball of goodness. Fuck this vision of splendour, this false reality reeking of reason. I shall cut off their heads and throw down a challenge to all that walk the darkened pathways. I am dumb child, born from dumb womb, reading dumb books on the way home from school. One hand is free, the other is tied behind my back. I need a saviour, some space between these sour hours. Sunrise, I haven't seen her, and my body casts no shadows. You are the sideshow, my late night nightmare sideshow. You are the monster in the dark, the monster under my bed, the monster in my head. You are many a pseudo-victory, a terrible fate fucker man. But now that I am older, I am done over, dealt out. Thank you.
Flooded rooms and rustling pipes, windows held together with tape. The door's unlocked, there are holes in walls, and the roof in the bathroom leaks. Home sweet home, I tell myself, for this is all I have. Yet deep inside I know the truth. This home is really my cage. For 1 decade and 8 more terms, I've lived in this empty house. Perhaps tomorrow I'll make my escape. Perhaps the toaster will fall in the tub. Thank you.
This is Jane's story. A friend of mine is an Anglican clergywoman, and this is the story of her the first service that she took in a small town near Canberra. My friend Jane, the clergywoman, slender as a silver birch, loves to tell the story of her first time at a country church, and how the guy who tolled the bell was out of town or in poor health, and how in all her priestly gear she'd had to man the rope herself, the knot high there above her head, its fibre hefty as the tone of that high single bell above her, set to ring at 14 stone, the normal sexton's weight on scale, a measure of his noble girth, and how he'd ring all 33 years that Christ had spent on earth, and how such ringing lifted her that many times above the ground, soaring high as if to heaven, then parachuting gently down. The ways of Christ would not be easy, she saw while flailing through the air, clinging to that godly stockwhip, cracking in the belfry there. Until all done, she smoothed her robes and strolled inside to pray and preach. Red-faced as the wine she held, she gave Christ's body each to each.
Our lives exist in parodies, tragedies and pantomimes, mitre boxes moulded from the woodblock of life, duplicated images of Adam and Eve. We traverse the cool spans of time, absorbed in our own self-importance, percolating ideas, theories and species of duplicity, simplicities and extremities. Our lives become parodies and tragedies and pantomimes forced by our own hands and minds. We stand at the chasm of our own being, appearing confident, happy, self-assured, when indecision abounds from all around. Self-loathing reeks through every pore like a swooning, chuffed, idiot savant. Our memories become parodies, tragedies and pantomimes to live through in our long years, where the day's cumbrance, the long remembrances. Indulgent to the end, we cling to a lingering death which never seems to come to take us from our parodies, tragedies and pantomimes. Thank you.
Word. It was a word, not a real word, just a word. She said it. I heard it. Did I hear it? She could have said it. Was I there? Maybe. Not so long ago. It wasn't a word. She's there, quiet. I'm tired. She's tired. We wait. It's so cold now. The door open. The rain. It's gone. Long gone. We wait. A step. A creak. Bye, she said. The rain again. The way of rain. It falls from her. The quiet street. A howl. Two howls. Sweet howls. Stop. She made stop. She is there. The rain falls from her. Quiet clouds. The wait. The word is there. That word. That cruel word again. The need to think. To die now. So broken now. Vile. Sweet love she gave. Please leave me, I said. The air, quiet, fades into rain. A smear. A quiet rain. Thank you.
This program was proudly supported by our sponsors.
Here are the current weather readings for Melbourne, Geelong and Shepparton on the MELfeed.video weather wall. It also includes tomorrow's forecast and expected minimum temperatures in these areas overnight. This is the MELfeed.video weather wall. We are currently looking for a sponsor. If you're interested, please email Michael at MELfeed.video for more details. MELfeed.video.
Hello, welcome to Transit. I'm Dave McLaughlin. This week we're at the SteamRail depot at the old railway workshops in Newport, and we'll be taking a look at the behind-the-scenes work that goes into the preservation of Victoria's steam heritage. Keith, tell us a bit about SteamRail Victoria and how it got started.
Okay, SteamRail started back in 1965, its predecessor being the Steam Preservation Coordinating Committee. Its development occurred because of this engine behind us. It was the ex-commissioner's engine and it was about to be withdrawn from service. A number of enthusiasts wanted to keep it in service for mainline use, and they approached the then railway commissioners and sought approval. It was obtained, and from those early days we were able to clean engines, paint engines, and eventually going to carriages before 1978-79 when we started to get outside firms to do our maintenance, and from that we've started to do our own maintenance from the early 80s.
And now you actually employ people of your own to do your maintenance?
Yes, we have 6 employees at the moment, 3 of them full-time, 2 of them part-time and 1 casual.
What's the membership of the organisation?
We have over 1,100 members, of them approximately 120 as volunteers.
What tours do you run?
We run what's called the Vintage Train, where it's available for the general public to travel on. We operate approximately once every month during certain periods of the year, 2 or 3 times a month. On top of that, we also have our charters to any firm that's interested in, or social club interested in hiring a train for a fundraising or a weekend out or a day out as required.
Apart from the tours, what is your main task here at SteamRail Victoria?
The main task really is just maintaining and restoring the items of rolling stock that we have in service, and liaising with other societies and organisations with a common interest, the government and tourism bodies, just to operate these trains throughout Victoria.
And how do you go about getting carriages and engines to restore and keep running?
Initially, the items of rolling stock were allocated to us, in which we were custodians for the state. There are still a number of those items, but these days, when we acquire equipment, we tend to have to buy it. This year we've purchased 6 carriages from South Australia. There are some sleeping carriages that were purchased from South Australia as well, ex-Victorians, that were sold back in 1989 to a kindred organisation over at Victor Harbour, and some Southern Aurora sleeper cars. We're bringing them back into service as well.
Tell us about some of the things you've got here in your workshops here, and that people are working on, like the bogies they're restoring at the moment.
Yes, well, for a number of our locomotives, such as our diesels, we have to have bogies maintained to mainline standard. Now that requires a lot of time and effort, particularly a lot of this equipment we get is in generally a rundown and poor state of condition, and it takes a fair bit of time. Then we've also got our carriage bogies, and also all the maintenance on the undergear for the steam locos. Basically that's a very specialised field, and only a handful of people work in that area.
Can you tell us what exactly a bogie is?
A bogie is really a frame that has the wheels attached to it that can pivot underneath the carriage or a locomotive. These are restricted to mainly electric locomotives, electric carriages, ordinary country cars and diesel locomotives.
So it's not just steam and carriages you preserve here, it's early electric and diesel?
Yes, we do definitely preserve diesels. We have 4 operational mainline diesels at the moment. There is the 5th one undergoing restoration at the moment, the B class, number 72. That was started back in 1995, and it'll be at least another 12 months before that's back in service. There is a number of swing door carriages and take carriages in service. We have 1 swing door finished, the second one is underway at the moment. They believe that will be about another 12 to 18 months before that is running. And take carriages, we're for them in service.
And what do you use the diesel locomotives for?
We do run occasional trips for the general public ourselves with the diesels, but primarily they're used for charter work. It's not as easy to hire a diesel off the railways these days, and it is a lot more cost effective to come to an organisation such as ourselves.
Hiring out locomotives and doing work for other companies with your paid staff here, that's part of what earns you money to keep going?
Yes, that is a supplementary income source for us. The main income source being running the trains ourselves or charter work. That's the locomotives and carriages altogether, and arranging for a particular customer. But as I said, it's supplementary income and it does assist us in going forward.
Do you get grants and other things like that?
SteamRail has never really actively chased grants. It had received one grant back in 1983 for the Victorian 150th anniversary celebrations, but everything that you see that we've got running or around here today, if it's not allocated, it's owned by us, and it has been purchased by money raised by SteamRail and its volunteer workforce.
What sort of expense does it cost to actually restore a steam engine?
It depends. The last one we restored back to service, this little girl came back into service last year. It cost us about $40,000. It was a major overhaul and it needed a lot of undergear work to be done to her. For some of the bigger engines, anything up to about $250,000. Once again, we're fortunate that a lot of our input is done by volunteers, and it does keep the cost down. We do have another locomotive which we're currently undergoing restoration at the moment. It's the A2, which is just immediately to my left. That will look at spending about $250,000 doing her up. She needs new tyres to be fitted to her main driving wheels, boiler repairs, frame repairs, and the general maintenance requirements. Now, we expect to have this running by middle of 2001. It's going to take a concerted effort, but we've got a team of very enthusiastic volunteers ready to undertake that, and we will need to put on some extra paid staff to expedite the restoration project of this locomotive.
How long does an engine last before it needs restoration, or will it keep going as long as it's regularly maintained?
As long as we keep the maintenance up to the engines and keep them to a very high standard, they can basically keep going indefinitely. The things that we don't have much control over is the wear and tear on the wheels and the boilers. Certainly with this engine, boilers are plenty. We don't have a problem there. Tyres, they're expensive. We can retire the wheels, but you're looking in the vicinity of $20,000 to $40,000 per locomotive to retire. When it comes to diesels, well, they're a lot easier to get the parts at the moment because they're still so readily available. Basically, if you've got good tyres and a good boiler, they can keep going 30, 40, 50 years without a problem.
Tell us a bit more about the A2 engine you're currently going to be restoring.
Yes, the A2 engine was acquired back in the mid-80s from the park in Warragul. There were 180 of these locomotives built around 1906 to 1921, or thereabouts, and of those only 5 survive. 2 of those in parks and 2 in the museum. We have the 5th one here. It's the only one that's available for restoration at the moment, and it's going to be costing us in the vicinity of $250,000 to restore it.
How are you financing that restoration?
The financing of the restoration has been fairly heavily kicked off by our members donating, raffles, trying to raise money that way, as well as a significant grant for the Federation. This locomotive was used to haul the dignitaries, or one of many locomotives used to haul the dignitaries to Parliament when Parliament was held here in Melbourne. And we believe it's a fitting mark of the Federation, the centenary of Federation, to have this locomotive restored back into service and run like special again with the wooden cars that we still have in service, which were in fact, many of those cars were the same cars used by those dignitaries.
As we can see, you obviously need to shunt things around the yard here. Who do you get to drive the engines?
Our main drivers here are PTC qualified or National Rail qualified drivers who are also members and volunteers of SteamRail. There's approximately 10 of those on the books. Even some suburban drivers are available too.
So there's a lot of keen or qualified people who want to come along and help with the organisation.
Absolutely, yes. It even goes to as far as diesel fitters and maintainers from South Dynon who are volunteers here as well. They work on our diesels and steam locomotives. Yes, we do have quite a strong base of railway employees involved in this organisation.
Now, in terms of training steam drivers, do you do that yourselves, or how do you train steam drivers? Obviously, it's not exactly a lost art, but it's something that's not done normally, so you can't just take a driver from the normal service and have them drive a steam loco for you. How do you go about training people to do that? And are they already regularly qualified drivers?
Yes, they are all regularly qualified drivers. They have to be to operate on the mainline system. Insofar as training, in the recent 5 or 6 years, there have been 2 to 3 schemes of driver training and fireman training that have involved the V-line freight, V-line passenger, training drivers on goods trains and passenger trains throughout the state. They've trained up last year 5 steam drivers and 3 steam firemen, and there was another driver trained up this year.
Why do you actually need fully qualified drivers?
The reason we need fully qualified drivers is purely safety. It's an intricate acquired skill to learn to drive and operate a train safely and to the best possible standards of comfort for the passengers.
What about an ordinary volunteer who comes along and would like to learn how to drive a steam train? Is there an opportunity for that?
Unfortunately, on the main line, it's very limited. Unless you're prepared to join the railways, like myself, and go down that path eventually, that's about the only way you can do it. The other way is simply on a tourist railway. Queenscliff, Puffing Billy, those sorts of organisations, Castlemaine, Melbourne, just to name a few. They are about the only way an ordinary volunteer can obtain the skills of driving a steam locomotive or even firing it.
And that's all for our visit here at the SteamRail workshops in Newport. Good night.
Water storage tanks can be a breeding ground for Legionnaire's disease bacteria. You can catch Legionnaire's disease by inhaling small droplets of infected water during showers or other activities. To prevent this from happening, you should never reduce the temperature setting. Tank temperature should be left as set by your plumber. Or eliminate the problem completely with a tankless gas hot water system. For more information, visit healthyhotwater.com.au.
MELfeed.video. MELfeed.video.
Welcome to the CEC Report for the 11th of May 2018. I'm Elisa Barwick. Joining me today is Robert Barwick, CEC Research Director. Welcome, Robert.
Thanks, Elisa.
And on today's show, how to survive the oncoming financial crisis, and Trump's Iran foolishness could spark World War III. So firstly today, how to survive the oncoming financial crisis. Now, we're often asked from supporters, from activists, from people that leave comments on the show, how do I protect my money? How do I protect my future? How do I secure my position? Now, really, there is only one answer to that, and it's the same answer that we always give, and that is that we must secure certain policies, and they're going to be policies that we'll run through in terms of the practical measures required to get through this crisis. Because really, a crisis is a great equaliser. Whether you're a prince or a pauper, it doesn't matter. Unless we make sure certain policies are enacted top down, then we won't, none of us will make it, and whether even humanity makes it will be a question mark.
There's nothing you can do for yourself personally that's guaranteed to work. Try everything, go nuts. What you have to do, when you're trying that, you've got to think what's good for everybody as a whole, the nation as a whole. That's how you protect yourself individually.
And that's what politics is. That's why it was invented. It's about people getting together to conspire to implement policies and set up institutions to affect those policies.
For the common good.
Exactly. So, and that's what government is as well. So firstly, Glass-Steagall. I think everyone, regular viewers, know what Glass-Steagall is, and we'll talk about it a lot today, including from the standpoint of what it is not, because there's a lot of discussion about breaking up the banks that's occurring in the wake of the Royal Commission findings. Of course, Glass-Steagall is a complete severance between any kind of gambling and between deposit taking.
The financial speculation is a cancer that's taken over the financial system in the last, say, 40 years, Elisa. We've got to get it out of the real financial system. That's what Glass-Steagall does. Nothing short of that is going to give us a successful financial system going forward. Right? So it's the most important thing.
And then we'll also discuss the reorganisation that would be required, because as people point out, you've got a housing bubble that needs to be deflated, that needs to happen in an orderly way, and we have written legislation in the past, such as the homeowners and bank protection legislation, to make that happen. So those things are critical, and things like a debt moratorium to restructure the unpayable debts of productive industries and farms. Then you've got the question of national banking, where we need to establish a bank of the nation to issue the credit to rebuild the nation, and which leads me to the final point, which is the economic reconstruction, emergency economic reconstruction to rebuild the nation with things that are critically needed.
So listen, just on those points, back to Glass-Steagall first, I want to make an appeal to all the viewers of the show. If you haven't already, get involved in our current campaign of getting ordinary citizens to contact their Member of Parliament about the Glass-Steagall legislation that Bob Katter will introduce into the Parliament. He's declared his intention to introduce it. He needs an MP to step forward and second it. And it's only going to happen if those MPs feel enough pressure from the public. I want to read a quick quote. We'll refer to this in a minute as well. But in the Times on the 2nd of May, they were talking about how they're listening. The London banks are nervous about the Royal Commission in Australia. And when they were recapping on how the Royal Commission came about, this Times journalist who wrote, Australia's banks are having a tougher time, and they have lost some of the dominant hold they used to have over politicians, opening the door to the Royal Commission. And that's actually a reference of how the corruption in our system works. They're just talking about it casually. Yeah, the banks had a hold over politicians. But it's also true that it's weakening. And when it weakens, then you, the public, have a say. But you've got to do it. Every call, every email, every visit you make to members of Parliament with this legislation, the CEC's bill, that we've drafted, that Bob Katter is going to introduce, adds to the pressure on them to actually do something. And even today in the paper, the Treasury has come out today saying we need to look at breaking up the banks, right? Ask the Royal Commission to look at that. That's what you're intersecting when you're doing that. So we really need people to do that. we need you to sign the change.org petition. And if you're watching this on YouTube, there's a link below, you can do that. Go to change.org and look for the petition that is calling on members of parliament to back this bill, right? Actually, if you haven't signed it already, go ahead and sign it straight away. Very important. Every time you sign it, members of parliament there's a bunch of emails go off to key MPs telling them that someone else has supported it, right? So you've got to do that. And then, in terms of the other areas that Lisa's just mentioned, because Glass-Steagall's the first step, and there's these other areas of economic reorganisation and the question of a national bank. You can call in and get a copy of this that we've just released. It's our manual on a national bank, right, and how national banking would work, but it also recaps what's the problems with the current system, including APRA. So you can see the headline there, the next financial crash is certain, and the Bank of England, Bank for International Settlements, APRA bankers dictatorship, time for Glass-Steagall banking separation and a national bank. And in there we lay out, as comprehensively as we can, how this system would work. If you want to know what's required for your country to reorganise so that all of us can be secure going forward, call in and get a copy of this.
And thanks to those people who have been emailing us the letters that they've sent to their MPs, and also do the same with feedback, because we need to monitor exactly who and where they are, what their position is, who's supporting this and who's not. That's critical to the mobilisation. Now, as you said, Robert, we've had international coverage, and you referenced the London Times there. So there are shockwaves sweeping the world after this Royal Commission, where the worry is that the talk of banking separation here in Australia is going to lead to a renewed push for it in the UK in particular, as well as the United States. Of course, we've had a number of people, Alan Fells, the former Australian Competition Consumer Council, Bernie Fraser, former Reserve Bank, a number of MPs pointing towards banking separation as a possible solution, Wacker Williams, even Green Senator Peter Whish-Wilson, Barnaby Joyce, and many other voices.
And the Treasury today, like I said, in the Australian newspaper, they've talked about it.
That was what I was about to get to, because in the Treasury, well, this is actually the result. We should add that after the last hearings of the Royal Commission, the 2-week block, Rowena Orr, the Special Queen's Counsel assisting Kenneth Haynes, the Commissioner, she had demanded that the banks and regulators all answer the query as to why they should be able to continue with the vertically integrated model of banking, where banks are allowed to not only take people's deposits but give them financial advice, sell their own products to them, sell them insurance and so forth. So they had to justify that to the Royal Commission. So the submissions have just come out. The Treasury submission said that the Commission should investigate what the benefits were from breaking up the banks, that just disclosure would not be enough. It said conflicts of interest are also inherent in such business models, and that separation would have benefits. So that was quite clear. ASIC said that the model of vertical integration and its benefits should be examined, though it did defend some aspects of the model.
Well, they defend what they call economy. They said it has economies of scale. Yes, it has, ASIC. You have no credibility, and the banks certainly they have economies of scale, all right. They can fleece people on an industrial scale with vertical integration.
And of course, no surprise, the banks completely defended the model, saying consumers would miss out on ample benefits if it was dispensed with, and that we can manage the conflict of interest, which of course there's ample evidence that they cannot manage.
I think the bank's response is key, Elisa, because what's happened lately is banks have been voluntarily divesting themselves of certain businesses, and politicians are being given this message, oh look, the banks are doing it anyway. No, what this shows is the banks are saying, do not dare force us to do it, because there's something there they don't want to be broken off from. Yeah, your deposits, that's what they don't want to be cut off from.
Now we've got to take a quick break, but after this we'll come back and talk about Clayton's models of Glass-Steagall breaking up the banks that will not work.
Hi, I'm Lane Beachley. Australians have recycled enough printer cartridges to cover Bondi Beach 12 times. That's kept 11,000 tonnes of valuable resources out of landfill. Drop your used original cartridges into the special boxes at participating retail outlets, and they'll be turned into new products, from pens to road surfaces. Help us keep up the good work. Find out more at cartridges.planetearth.org.
You teach us strangers are dangerous. But someone we know is a much more likely threat. You teach us strangers are dangerous. But who will help when you're not around? Create a world without unnecessary fear. Prepare, don't scare.
There's a difference between forgetting something once and forgetting it many times. There's a difference between forgetfulness and dementia. Talk to someone who understands. Call the National Dementia Helpline on 1800 100 500.
Welcome back to the CEC Report, where we're talking about how to survive the oncoming global financial crisis. Now, we were just talking about all the momentum towards banking separation, which now even the Treasury is suggesting we need to look into rather closely. Now, of course, we've seen this happen before. In the United Kingdom in 2013, there was incredible momentum for Glass-Steagall, and in order to stop it, what was put forward was a model that fell short of full Glass-Steagall banking separation. And our media in Australia has referred to that model. It came out of the UK's 2011 Independent Commission on Banking, so that was kind of their Royal Commission. And the result of that, it was led by Sir John Vickers. He was former Bank of England and so forth. He's now known as the architect of what's called ring fencing, which was what he proposed, which fell short of Glass-Steagall. Now, in the Sydney Morning Herald on the 29th of April, they cited John Vickers saying, and this was around that 2011 period, that ring fencing was a better solution than structural separation.
So ring fencing is, instead of forcing the banks to break up into smaller entities where a separate bank has deposits, they say to these big mega banks, you've got to divide them internally, ring fence your deposit part, but you can stay under the one institution. Right?
The one roof.
You've got these Chinese walls between them, you can't do anything, but they can stay under the one institution. And it's not the real deal at all, and it's open for abuse.
Yeah, but now the Sydney Morning Herald, they really need to subscribe to the Australian Alert Service to get some more up-to-date information here, because several times in the last 2 to 3 years, John Vickers has actually come out saying, look, British banks are still undercapitalised, they're vulnerable, the leverage in the British banking system is quote-unquote dangerously high. The regulators fell short of what was required to crisis-proof the system. And he said this again on the 2nd of May, and he concluded by saying, goodness knows what would happen if there was another systemic crash like the last one, which he's indicating that there will be.
So this was definitely dishonest reporting by the Sydney Morning Herald to quote Vickers from 2011 on how this is a better model, because they legislated in 2013 and it's now 2018, and he's saying this. There's been virtually no progress in the British banks at all under this model, right? So the whole thing is a fraud. We warned at the time it would be the case. The bankers, there's a whole bunch of bankers in the House of Lords, at least ex-bankers, who they voted for a full Glass-Steagall instead, because they said, look, this isn't going to work. One of them had this great line about how bankers are extremely adept at getting between the wallpaper and the wall, right? So you can have this division, they'll find a way around it. And the other thing is, even if they don't find a way around it, if there's a crisis, the bank, in the investment banking side or some other side, the management of the bank will be really tempted to use the deposit side to bail that out, right? And then that puts the deposits at risk. So no, it just doesn't work. You've got to have a full separation.
Yeah, and part of the proof of that is the fact that before Glass-Steagall legislation was implemented in 1933, this model, which we today call ring fencing, is exactly what existed then. And you had banks like National City Bank that got around that existing legislation by setting up these securities affiliates that were under the same roof, but they were completely separate. So we would just be going back to that disaster which led to Glass-Steagall.
So what we're warning about is in the Australian debate at the moment is at that position where I suspect the Treasury, and even though they've said this today, which is good, they're going to start wanting to water down the debate. So at worst for them it becomes something like a ring fencing model, not full separation. The public must know the difference and insist on full separation.
Yep.
You don't try and change the culture of banking, because unfortunately the love of money is the root of all evil. There's a quote for you. And these financial people are too easily predators, so you've got to lock them away from the important financial system. Right? Don't try and change the culture, lock them away from it.
Now, the global financial crash oncoming, which many high-level people are warning about, is driving the momentum, of course, to consider these solutions such as Glass-Steagall. And we want to briefly talk about a new book that is out by Naomi Prinz, which is very significant because she's a former banker at both Wall Street and City of London firms such as Bear Stearns, Lehman Brothers and Goldman Sachs.
Very highly qualified, experienced former insider of the banking system, who once she came out from it has put out some of the most informative material about how the banking system works and how important Glass-Steagall is.
Yeah, she's a big supporter of Glass-Steagall. So her new book is called Collusion: How Central Bankers Rigged the World. And she goes through the quantitative easing program, how central bankers worked together, colluded together in an extraordinary way. And she said this the other day, talking about her book. She said, look, today we stand near, how near we don't yet know, the edge of a dangerous financial precipice. The risks posed by the largest of the private banks still exist, only now they're even bigger than they were in 2007-08 and operating in an arena of even more debt.
So this expert, Naomi Prinz, when she's not writing books like this, she's in the US Congress lobbying them to go back to full Glass-Steagall, right? She writes her book around it. She explains it in her book. I can't recommend it enough. It only came out on the 1st or the 2nd of May. It's really worth getting and looking at.
Now we have to stop again, and after the break we're going to talk about Iran.
It's easy for things to go wrong around water. More so if you can't swim.
It's great seeing kids confident in the water and enjoying themselves. An important part of keeping kids safer around water is learning to swim.
There are over 600 registered swimming schools that run the Australian Unity Learn to Swim program. To find one, go to the Swim Australia website.
Hush, little baby, don't you cry. Daddy's gonna sing you a lullaby. When you're sleeping safe and sound, you've got the proudest dad in town. I remember when I first saw you, your heart beating as you grew. We'll read you stories to help you dream. Your mummy and I are a perfect team. I can't wait to hear you sing or watch as you put on a wedding ring. One day you'll have children too. Remember the times I sang to you.
If you were living on the streets, wouldn't you want more than just your best friend to keep you safe and warm? Donate to Backpack Bed for Homeless and give warm, waterproof protection and dignity tonight. Call 1300 OzHelp.
Every new line means two more hands. Join us, lions.org.au.
Welcome back to the CEC Report. Now we're discussing Trump's Iran foolishness could spark World War III. And just a reminder that regarding the last segment, there's more information in this week's Australian Alert Service about ring fencing and the financial crash oncoming. So call in if you haven't already for a complimentary copy of that. Now, Iran. On 8th of May, Donald Trump announced the US would withdraw from the Joint Comprehensive Plan on Action, the JCPOA, that's the nuclear deal with Iran, that the US would immediately reimpose sanctions. The other signatories of the deal, the UK, France, Germany, Russia, China and Iran itself, at this point are sticking to the deal and will try to keep it together. But the war danger has escalated dramatically because essentially Trump has given a green light to the escalation that's occurring in the region. Israel has been conducting military strikes in Syria for some time now, but from the beginning of April, it began making specific targeted bombing raids against Iranian army targets, not just Hezbollah, but Iranian army targets inside Syria. And this has expanded in the wake of Trump's decision. The Iranians launched rockets at targets in the Golan Heights, 20 rockets, none of them actually hit their targets, but Israel's response was extremely heavy-handed, with the most extensive strikes yet against Iranian target in Syria, including in Damascus. Now, this is how it was portrayed on the news last night.
Tensions in the Middle East have exploded into violence, with Iran launching a barrage of rockets into Israeli territory from bases in Syria. Israel returned fire, shelling Iranian positions inside Syria before ordering airstrikes on the capital, Damascus.
It's not just the actions, Elisa, that's the danger of World War III, it's the way the media reports it, so there's no truth there. Everything you just saw there is factually incorrect. They did not talk about the fact, they talk about it as if what Israel's doing is a retaliation, whereas Israel struck first into these Iranian targets, as you said, and the Iranians didn't hit Israel. They struck the Golan Heights, which is Syrian territory occupied by Israel, right? So it's just that kind of reporting that, to an Australian audience, that just is a pack of lies.
Now, it is dangerous. Iran is an ally of Russia. Netanyahu himself in the country domestically is facing multiple criminal charges, so he needs a big distraction. But the key thing to look at really is Trump is getting very bad advice, and there's a growing stable of neocons that are in there, including two of the latest people who are incoming. That is the National Security Advisor John Bolton and former New York City Mayor Rudolph Giuliani, who's joined Trump's legal defence team. But both of these two have received, over a long term, funding from the MEK, the Mujahideen al-Khalq, a terrorist organisation which is part of a rebel group moving against the Iranian government.
They were a terrorist organisation until Hillary Clinton took them off the list, and now they've been able to fund American politicians, etc., and infiltrate the Trump administration. And
John Bolton, for one figure, I mean, he was a key player in the setup of the Iraqi WMD scandal, because in the post-9/11 Iraq War period, he was in the Pentagon and the State Department. He was the go-to guy for Defence Secretary Donald Rumsfeld and Vice President Dick Cheney, who were leading the charge to invade 7 countries in 5 years. You can see last week's show for a video about that. And Bolton actually arranged for the infamous intelligence on yellowcake uranium having been procured by Iraq being put into a fact sheet requested by the State Department, even though the CIA had already denied any merit to that report. And that led, of course, to the 2003 Iraq intervention. And Bolton led the campaign to get rid of the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Mohammed al-Baradei, who had declared that there were no evidence of nuclear weapons in Iran. So Bolton led the campaign to get him ousted.
There's a lot of things that Donald Trump is not wrong about, Elisa. This is something he was wrong about from the beginning. In his mind, he would think he's delivering on an election promise to get out of this nuclear agreement with Iran. The problem is the people advising him to do it are the same people he denounced in his campaign for their regime change policies. And he's let them infiltrate him. And it's these two you've mentioned. It's Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. They're all involved in the regime change architecture, and now they're running the show, unfortunately.
And there's another neocon incoming as CIA Director Gina Haspel. She was at the CIA for 33 years, known as Bloody Gina for her role in the CIA torture program. And there's a group called Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity that has put out a statement demanding she not be confirmed as nominee. And we want to show a video of Ray McGovern, a member of VIPS, a former intelligence officer and CIA presidential briefer. He's 78 years old, and this is how he was treated when he tried to intervene at the hearing, confirmation hearing.
Stop resisting! Stop resisting! It's on the record. Stop resisting! And in many respects, you guys are going into secret hiding.
Excuse me.
Stop resisting.
I'm not resisting.
Yes, you are. Give me your arm. Give me your arm.
I'm lying on.
Give me your arm. It's dislocated, man. Give me your arm. My left arm is. Give me your arm. My left arm is dislocated. Damn it. Give me Don't your arm. you understand?
Stop hurting him.
Don't you understand? My left arm is. Ah! Hold on. Stop fighting. I'm not fighting. I'm on the ground. And if you let me get my glasses on, I can see what's happening.
You're hurting him.
You guys are hurting me.
Stop hurting him.
I'm immobilized. I'm immobilized. You're going to dislocate my shoulder again. And look, would you pick up my glasses before you step on them?
Why does this require 5
We'll get you up first. Sir, time to stand up. Well, how about giving me a new pen?
Hold on. We're going to get you up first and we'll get you up here, all right?
I can stand up by myself.
No, we're going to get you up.
Shame on you for hurting him.
By myself. I'm not a terrorist.
Sir, get up on your
I'm a
feet,
CIA,
Roll them on the
alumnus,
side.
27 years, analyst and operations.
Now sit up, sir.
Waterboarding can never be
Sir, are you going to stand up
declared-
for us, sir?
I'll stand up.
All right, come on, please stand up, please.
Never be declared. Oh,
Come on and stand up for us.
okay,
All right.
let me in here. Now you're going to pick up my glasses.
Sir, we'll take care of that. We just want to get you up first, all right?
Okay.
All right.
Waterboarding
Come on and stand up.
can never be
Come on and stand.
told.
Come on and have a seat.
She personally supervised it in Thailand
Come on and
at
stand
the
up.
first
Come
black
on and stand
site.
up.
That's not a secret.
Stand up, sir.
That's only a secret because she won't recuse herself.
Take this one.
She won't my left.
All right, look.
My left one is dislocated. All right. I'll go out. Yeah.
All right.
I'll go
Relax
out.
here.
But I
Relax
wish
here.
that you
Relax
wouldn't
here.
beat up an old man, huh?
You decided that you
You an
wanted to
officer?
demonstrate. You
I was
decided
an
to
officer
demonstrate.
too. Tell these guys
Come on,
these guys are the thugs that
this way.
actually
Bring 'em this way.
torture people.
Come on this way.
Shame on you for hurting him.
CIA analyst and operations
It was
person.
unnecessarily
Water
excessive.
Thank you
Can
very
be
much.
classified, but it cannot be made legal.
That man, Elisa, Ray McGovern, is a good friend of mine. I got to meet him in 2014 in Germany. We spent a night singing Irish drinking songs beside a river after a conference. He's a great guy. He shows you that, don't ever think that the deep state is just, one homogenised thing. Now, here's someone who was from the CIA, who's exposed these operations, etc. And he's a man of principle, and this is the way he gets treated. But Donald Trump should be listening to him and not these other people that he's listening to at the moment.
Yeah. So join our campaign to become a political animal and secure your future. Call your Member of Parliament, call us for a copy of the manual and get involved in any other way that you can. That's all we've got time for this week. Thanks, Robert.
Thanks, Elisa.
Thanks for tuning in and join us again next week.
Come on, fellas. Let's get down there.
Hang on. Where's Dave?
Oh, hey fellas. What do you think? Pretty cool, eh?
Real men look out for each other. Don't let your mates drink and drown.
Okay, Sarah, I'm going to order some pathology tests to see how everything's going.
Half the Australian population had a pathology test last year. That's you or someone you love. 100 tests are performed every minute, delivering vital medical information. From the moment you are born, your healthcare depends on pathology tests. 70% of medical decisions rely on information from pathology tests. Pathology is the engine room of healthcare. One small sample can reveal millions of insights all about you. Pathologists are your doctor's doctor. 25,000 people work to provide doctors with the answers they need to treat you. Australian pathology is world class. We may never meet you, but we see each of you as part of our family. Every minute, 23 Australians find out more about their health.
Good news, Sarah. The results show that everything's okay.
Pathology provides peace of mind.
I rely on Australian pathology.
Sign up online to support Australian pathology.
I didn't think this could happen in Toowoomba. And then I saw it on TV that night. It really opened my eyes.
Whenever the community comes to us and says we need your help, we do whatever we can to assist.
It is a great feeling to be able to help your neighbours, to be able to help your community.
Each Lions member and each Lions club in different parts of the country, we're totally different. But we have core values that are the same. They remain the same for any Lions member and any Lions club anywhere in not just Australia but around the world.
Anything that you can think of that you want to do and support and help, Lions are doing it right now somewhere in this world.
I think Lions need to tell their story. They need to let people know the amazing things that they do.
The three major streams that we have in Lions are the community service that we do for the public, health and medical research, and the disaster relief.
We're out there to help people. If you love helping people, get out and help them. Join a Lions Club.
We started this project about 20 years ago. All this gear would normally go to the tip. We recycle it and give it to someone less fortunate and where it is needed in the world.
Being a Lion here in Australia means that I can make a difference to my community. But most importantly, it's inspiring other people to get out and be part of their community and make it a safer and a much happier and better place to live.
Childhood cancer, I've always been interested in cancer and small children from the time I first got cancer 30 years ago. Research is an indefinite item. You can't see it, but it helps so much.
I'm here managing the money and the relationships, but other people are out there raising funds and bringing in community support. Without all of us working together, we can't affect change.
2 more extra hands at any function, any working bee, anything we do, 2 more hands can help us raise more funds, can help us serve our community better.
I went to my Lions Club and I said, I got this idea and I think it's a little bit crazy, but I think we could raise some serious money doing it. And it was to run 100 kilometres. And the club said, okay, if you want to do this, whatever you need us to do, we'll be there 100%. And I'm pretty proud to say that together we raised just over $16,000. So we blew the target out of the water, and I think that was due to a lot of the support that I got.
Through my leadership training and all that, I've learned about thinking global, acting local, and Lions Club is definitely that kind of thing. They act within their communities, but the money that they raise can often end up in any corner of the world.
As an individual, I could only do so much, and whilst it was my burning desire to try and help these people, having an organisation such as the Lions family to call upon to support me and those people that were working with me just made it possible for us to achieve so much more.
You know, after the devastation, to come back into the community, you know, you were shattered by what you saw. You know, no police station, no post office, no petrol station, you know, no kindergarten. There was nothing here.
And all that water with an unstoppable.
I don't know that I've ever seen as much as arrived. There were fridges, washing machines, dryers. There were toasters, jugs, just everything.
To be invited to be a part of Lions just opened up a whole new world to me. A world that provided a structured organisation that could see that the hours that I volunteered could achieve so much more.
I think Lions is a wonderful organisation. The people in it have charity in their hearts.
I can go anywhere in this country, see somebody with a Lions badge, walk up to them and say, "Good day, you got a friend."
Never once in my life had I had a group of people where I could go to, say anything, and know that no matter what, they would be there, they would stand by me.
It's the family. That's what we call it's the Lions family. Without Lions, I think I'd be lost now because they've been my life.
We work hard, but the most important thing is we have fun.
The fellowship of all the members of the club, the broader community, it's just a tremendous organisation to belong to. You know, I'll be here till I die.
It is extremely rewarding and gratifying to be a part of an organisation that can spread its support so far and wide.
More members means more hands, means more support to the community.
I would encourage everyone just to give it a go and see if it is for them, because the return that you get for giving to others is amazing.
Get out there, do something wonderful, be part of this fantastic organisation.
They say there's a chance I could die in a car crash, maybe even from heart disease, maybe even skin cancer.
I could die in a work-related accident, or I could die in a fight.
The fact is, the biggest cause of death for men in my age group is suicide.
Please don't let this happen to me.
You can do something. Lifeline believes that suicide is mostly preventable. Help us save lives. Find out what you can do at lifeline.org.au.
MELfeed Video is about to close operations for tonight, but we'll be back with you next Wednesday evening. In the meantime, here is a selection of programs that will be seen on our next scheduled web stream. You are welcome to visit our website at MELfeed.video for further details of this project. Until next time, from all of us at MELfeed Video, we wish you a very good night.